Welcome to EduCasts, home of EduCasters. If you ask most people what school is for, they will give you a pragmatic answer. They'll say it's about learning to read, write, and do algebra. They'll say it's about getting ready for college or preparing for a job. They see the classroom as a sort of intellectual filling station where students pull up, get their tanks topped off with facts and skills, and drive off into the economy. But every teacher, every parent, and frankly, every student knows that this is only half the story, and maybe not even the most important half. Education is never just about transferring data. It is always, inevitably, about soulcraft. From the moment a child walks into a kindergarten classroom, they are being taught how to be. They are learning what is good and what is bad. They are learning what is fair and what is unfair. They are learning who deserves respect and who doesn't, whether we admit it or not. Schools are moral engines. This brings us to the tricky, often uncomfortable topic of moralism in education. Moralism isn't just teaching morals. Teaching morals is inevitable. You can't have a community of 30 humans in a room without rules and values. Moralism, on the other hand, is something distinct. It is the specific, often heavy-handed habit of using education to impose a specific code of conduct, a specific worldview, or a specific definition of the good life upon students. It's the difference between teaching a child to think ethically and telling a child what to think. We are going to take a long, hard look at this phenomenon. We will explore how American schools started as explicit training grounds for religious morality, how they tried and failed to become neutral in the 20th century, and how moralism has come roaring back today from both the political right and the left. We're going to dig into the authentic reality of the classroom to see how this plays out, not in theory, but in the messy, real lives of students and teachers. To understand the American education system, you have to remember that it didn't start with the Constitution or the Industrial Revolution. It started with the Puritans. In colonial New England, the very first education laws were not passed to create workers or scientists. They were passed to trick the devil. The Old Deluder Satan Act of 1647 required towns to hire a schoolmaster for one specific reason: to teach children to read the Bible so they wouldn't be deluded by Satan. In these early days, moralism wasn't a hidden agenda. It was the only agenda. If you look at the textbooks from this era, like the New England Primer, they are almost shocking to modern eyes. They didn't teach A is for apple. They taught A, in Adam's fall, we sinned all. The alphabet itself was a theology lesson. Learning to read was inseparable from learning that you were a sinner in need of redemption. Fast forward to the 19th century, and you get the McGuffey readers. These were the standard textbooks for generations of American children. They sold over 120 million copies, and they were drenched in moralism. A typical lesson in a McGuffey reader wasn't just a story about a boy flying a kite. It was a story about a boy who disobeyed his mother, flew his kite on the Sabbath, and then got struck by lightning, or some similarly grim fate. The lesson was always clear. Obedience, hard work, honesty, and piety lead to success. Laziness, lying, and disobedience lead to ruin. This was old-school moralism. It was Protestant, patriotic, and incredibly direct. It taught that poverty was usually the result of a character flaw, and that wealth was a sign of virtue. It created a unified cultural narrative, but it was a narrative that excluded a lot of people: Catholics, Jews, African Americans, Native Americans, and anyone who didn't fit that specific mold. But the key takeaway here is that for the first 200 years of American history, nobody pretended school was neutral. The teacher was a moral authority, often an extension of the local preacher. Then came the 20th century. America changed. We became more urban, more industrial, and vastly more diverse. Immigration brought millions of people who didn't share the strict Protestant worldview of the founders. Science and psychology began to rise. Educators like John Dewey and the progressive movement started to argue that the old way, scaring kids with hellfire and demanding blind obedience, wasn't actually good education. They wanted schools to be more scientific, more democratic, and more rational, so explicit moralism went out of style. By the mid-20th century, you started to see a shift toward values clarification. This was a popular idea in the 60s and 70s. The theory was that teachers shouldn't tell kids what is right or wrong. Instead, they should help kids clarify their own values. If a student said, "I think stealing is okay if you need the money," the teacher wasn't supposed to say, "No, stealing is wrong." The teacher was supposed to ask, "Interesting. Why is that important to you? Have you considered the alternatives?" The goal was to be non-judgmental. It was an attempt to respect the diversity of the students, but in practice, it often led to moral relativism. It gave students the impression that morality was just like a flavor of ice cream, a personal preference with no real consequences. But here is the catch. You can chase moralism out the front door, but it will sneak in through the window. Even in these neutral schools, moralism was still happening. It just went underground. It became part of the hidden curriculum. Schools were still teaching values, but now they were the values of industrial capitalism. Punctuality. Being on time is a moral virtue. Compliance. Doing what you are told without complaint is being good. Individualism. Your grade is your own. Helping others is often called cheating. The moral lesson shifted from be a good Christian to be a good employee. The good student was the one who was quiet, organized, and productive. The bad student was the one who was disruptive, messy, or questioned authority too much. We wrapped moral judgment in the language of behavior management, but the judgment was still there. By the 1980s and 90s, the pendulum swung back, hard. There was a growing anxiety in America that the youth of today were out of control. Crime rates were high, drug use was visible, and the family structure seemed to be fracturing. Conservative thinkers like William Bennett, who wrote the Book of Virtues, argued that we had lost our way because we stopped teaching right from wrong. This launched the modern character education movement. If you went to school in the 90s or 2000s, you know exactly what this looks like. It looks like posters on the cafeteria wall. Trustworthiness, respect, responsibility, fairness, caring, citizenship. This was the 6 pillars of character approach. Schools started holding assemblies to give out awards for Student of the Month. They tried to turn virtues into vocabulary words. The problem with this approach, and many educators pointed this out, is that it is often incredibly superficial. It treats virtues like stickers you can just slap onto a kid. It reduces complex moral struggles to slogans. It tells a kid to be respectful, but it rarely engages with the reality of that kid's life. Is it respectful to stay silent when a teacher is being unfair? Is it responsible to turn in your homework if you had to spend the night taking care of your little sister because your mom was working a double shift? This type of moralism often focuses entirely on behavior compliance. It equates morality with being easy for adults to manage. A quiet kid is seen as a good kid. A loud, energetic kid is seen as a bad kid. This isn't ethical training. It's obedience training. Furthermore, it often completely ignores the context. It tells kids to say no to drugs without ever discussing the economic despair that drives addiction. It tells kids to be fair without ever discussing the structural unfairness of the school system itself, where rich schools have swimming pools and poor schools don't have textbooks. It puts the entire burden of morality on the shoulders of the individual child while letting the adults and the system off the hook.